Hi, I'm Eshkalar, the world's greatest Canadian wizard, and I want to have a crossover today between your Fighting Arts is Wrong series and Mythic Persons. Today I'm going to talk about magical swords. Yeah, I am. Durandal, Roland's famed blade, known to be razor sharp. Razors dull very quickly, you know. Ask any barber that stays in business. So anyway, because you can either have a very fine honed point, or you can have a very resistant point that's blunter. That's the trade-off is you have you can either make it tougher or finer. Can't have both. Well, modern materials, that's part of my conversation today. So, how can you make a sword magical? How can you make a sword better with magic? I'm quantifying magic as the 27th quantum field. Our universe no longer possesses these super metals, I call them, but there used to be elements that were fairly stable that existed in nucleon counts in the 440, 24, something like that, and also in the 530 and the 6, I forget, 600 somethings. And these elements, which in my old continua were called, let's see, Deminsk, Ephodium, and Hecatium. You know, in ascending order, it's, if I get this right, it's Hecadium, Deminsk, and Ephodium. Ephodium is the most potent. At any rate, that these specific elements, which no longer exist in our universe, have, in their most stable forms, half-lives the order of 1 billion years or 2 billion years. And so there is magic in universes early on. And as the universe ages, these elements are the first ones to break down, other than the short-lived radionuclides. And these super elements do break down into more familiar radionuclides. That's why the evidence we see seems to indicate the confirmation bias, right? What we see is what we get. There's nothing else. But these elements, of course, did exist. They're all broken down now into byproducts that themselves broke down, most of them, and the other ones that didn't are ones we expect to find. So it's the way that works. But in a magical universe, these elements are still present and they're still breaking down and they're still populating. The binding energy, some of which is expressed in these Kel particles, is populating the standing magical field. And that's how work is done by wizards. And part of that work would be to enchant a weapon. What can you do to a weapon to make it better than it already is? Well, not much. Almost everything you can do to it can be handled by better metallurgy. Yes or no? You can make the blade that perfect balance between the ability to sharpen it and keep it real sharp and keep sharpening it, and the ability to take harm and resistance. Because a blade you can make extremely sharp with like sandpaper or or whetstone or something is a blade that will also dull very quickly in use. So you have to you have to decide on the metal of your edge whether you want it to be sharp and to blunt easily and have to be resharpened very often, or do you want it harder but not quite as sharp, or harder and more brittle so that it doesn't you can chip it rather than just deform it and resharpen it. So anyway, these things can be handled through materials. And you don't want to make a sword lighter because a lot of the energy that a sword transmits, it transmits through inertia. And that requires mass and motion, right, on the part of both the swordsman and the weapon itself. If you make it lighter, you come into the same problem that a lifelong acoustic guitarist comes to when he picks up an electric guitar. He goes, whoa, what the heck? It takes him a long time to be able to play slow because it's so easy, so facile, that you have to learn a whole new set of skills and a whole new set of reflexes to compensate for how your old skills don't any longer apply. So, you can't make a sword lighter. It won't do as much damage when it hits. You can make it seem a little sharper with like a magical coating to the edge, right? To make it a little more like tempered steel, but still able to keep a good sharpness. And you'll have to be using magic to spruce it up from time to time. See? An ongoing enchanting process. Because just like metal, it's going to wear, the impact is going to change things, going to spend energy for the magic. So you can't make it faster, because if you make it faster, the swordsman has to learn a whole new way to use a sword. Is to retrain himself or herself from 0 to 90. I know how to do this. Whoa, I just cut myself. I didn't know I was going to, oh my gosh. It's dangerous as heck. Um, I would liken it, even though it's not, like a broad analogy would be a butter knife versus a surgical scalpel. You can drop a butter knife on your foot, you can hit somebody in the head with it, it'll be okay. But if you did that with a scalpel, you're like, oh, I didn't mean it. Oh, I went right through my finger. Oh my gosh. You see what I mean? That's why you don't have scalpels on the table when you're eating dinner, because it's so easy to cut yourself. I have a friend who's a butcher, and he has cuts all over his hands. Oh, whoa, so many. And he says you couldn't handle knives I handle, Eshkalar, because I handle sharp knives. We could do surgery with them. And he's right. If I just played with one of those knives like I did with the knives on my dinner table, I could hurt myself bad. Just a little nicks and cuts I usually give myself would have gone right through. And that's materials, mind you. So magic isn't really needed for the materials. For the cost and expense of getting a wizard to enchant your stuff and a first-class blacksmith to make it already out of the finest materials, you're not going to get that much of a benefit. So the next is you can't make it move faster either, because if you do, the wizard now is no longer a master. I mean, the swordsman is no longer a master swordsman. Now he's a novice learning a brand new weapon and a brand new way to do it all. And where that can be fun, this is going to make you more effective in combat. The idea of coating his sword with magical Teflon so it glides through the air instead of having any resistance at all. See? So you can turn it broadside to somebody, swish it at the speed of light, not really, but as fast as possible, without any wind resistance. That'll be good. But again, if the swordsman can't compensate for the extra speed, he's lost. It's not helping him at all. It's Hollywood special effects. It's not practical fighting technique. So, not much you can do with it. Now, the only thing I can think of that might help is if you stored energy in the blade that is released when you strike it. But then look at all the mistakes you can make. Then you have to tell it when to do that. Call it a command word. Try doing that in battle in time. Try doing that when you're playing baseball and call out a command word just in time to hit the ball and not at the wrong time. See what I mean? Just, wow. I don't think there's much you can do with magic. The only thing that seems that the book tropes, the fantasy movie tropes and all those things would bring to the table is to say, like, well, what about this sword? We've imbued it with the soul of a fighter, or the soul of a demonic spirit, or the soul of an elemental, or some whatever you're going to call it. Something that's probably inimical to humans. Probably, right? Would you put? Why floor you put me in the cold ground weapon? So a spirit like that is stuck in a sword is effectively in a prison. What can it do for the sword? Nothing. It's an ice spirit. I don't know what that means. It gives off cold. It's kind of like you would need a filter that filters the non-active molecules out of the air and then discharges them at a vent somewhere to make it seem like it was cold around the place on that sword, And that would create a lot of problems and resistance to do that, to pass through all the air and resist most of it and only accept a little bit of it. There's nothing much you can do with it. Any creature that you imbued into a sword would be a creature that was trying as hard as it could to get out, yes, and if it wasn't, what can it affect? Only the mind of the swordsman. Do you want somebody working at your mind constantly, day in and day out, where you're trying to fight a battle? I don't think so. It's going to distract you. It's going to trouble you. It's going to, whatever starts shouting at you while you're sleeping. What if you're in the bathroom and it wants to talk? Excuse me, just don't talk for a while. So, so it can't really help in any way except to get in your way. It's going to confuse you. It's going to trouble you. Otherwise, why would it, what does it have to say? Nothing. Look out behind you. Okay, if you're any kind of swordsman, you already knew to look out behind you. And that's something else I want to get to. This is the basic premise from which I am departing today, is that if you want to make a sword better, you can either make it better through materials, and that's easier to do than magic. The other thing you can do is increase the skill of the swordsman. If you do that, every sword in that swordsman's hand will be a dangerous and deadly weapon that can be effectively used by that swordsman's skill set. Whereas things that aren't like that, things that are too different from it, are going to get in his or her way. Uh, I love spears, but I wouldn't know how to use one. I love swords, but I wouldn't know how to use one. I love wands, but I'm not going to use one to try to poke somebody with it. Oh my gosh. Use a wand as a trigger for a specific spell. A wand helps focus the mind into a lens that creates a pathway to channel energy from the standing magical field to do work in the real world, and thereby some of the energy is randomized as blood heat. And that doesn't matter if you're using a wand or a staff or whatever. If you cast a spell and your mind is used to do that, you're going to heat your blood up. But a wand can make it, look at it, it's very easy. There is part of the pattern that you need to keep in your mind to make that work get done. And that's what the wand is carved with. Makes it easier to remember. It's a mnemonic device. But you didn't know that about wands. You think it's like Harry Potter? Yeah. That's for kids. At any rate, this is your old pal Eshkalar telling you that the really important thing if you want to enchant a sword is to make the swordsman a better swordsman. And your master swordsman is better than a higher quality weapon. He is better than a magically augmented weapon. And if he gets something that can perform way outside of its normal parameters, he or she is going to have to learn a whole new skill set. It's going to set him or her back 20 years. And whereas that might be good for a personal development story, it's going to be bad for being in battle. So this is Eshkalar. There is no reason to have an enchanted sword. Just buy 10 normal swords. And they're easier to get fixed too. Any blacksmith, any sword shop. Whereas a magically treated sword would have to be fixed by a wizard. And I tell you what, we're expensive. We all got drug habits as long as you are. And you don't have to support that. That sends a bad message to the kids, you know? All right, this is Eshkalar, the world's greatest Canadian wizard. You can tell I'm Canadian because I know more about this topic than any other ignorant person alive. Ha! And you can trust me because I think I'm always right, and I certainly never lie. Eshkalar.